This is something like a great sports team. Pick your sport, whether it's soccer, football, basketball, whatever. You guys all know your moves. You all know what you do so well. When you get in the studio, how much discussion is there, or is it just getting down to work?
There's very little discussion. We don't have to say a lot. Everyone knows what to do. Also, you don't want to tell Lou what to do because he gets really angry. Better not to arouse him, So basically, it was like falling off. Everyone knew what to do. There was charts. Steve had written out charts to make it easy for us to learn the stuff, or for the fellas to learn it.
Right.
We don't need these, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's as it should
be. In terms of the repertoire, what was the repertoire? You guys writing songs? You choosing covers?
Well, on this particular album, it was all my tunes because I was the one.
Oh, right, because they were the ones they contacted you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I must say that subsequent to that, we are now all writing tunes together in various combinations together. The next thing we do is going to be all new originals.
Right. So the record came out in Japan. Am I right?
Yeah.
And the record is called.
The record's called Danny Kortchmar and the Immediate Family, but from now on it's just going to be Immediate Family.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're
And that's
redoing
what-
something for the U.S. Is that the idea?
We're gonna, we're working on how to structure it, whether it's gonna be that record or part of that record, because we did four new tunes
Yeah.
of Danny's on that record. And, so we may release that record as it is here, but we're more likely gonna do a new record with some of that material and new songs we're all writing. The band now is Waddy, myself, and Danny all sing. And it's really it's a 5-person band.
Yeah.
Everybody's involved.
Yeah.
And I think the record that comes out here will reflect that.
Yeah. And tour? Take it on tour?
Just came back.
Well, you were in Japan, I know. How did that go, by the way?
Put it over here.
Yeah.
It was great. We got to do 2 shows a night and one festival show at the end of it. And it's remarkable to, after having been there so many different times with so many different artists, to go there without backing up an artist and be received the way we were, and just doing our own music. Even though most of it was Kucha's music, but still. But we were doing a lot of the original compositions then, so it was great. It was a fantastic time.
We were kind of joking that we're like the ultimate cover band. Everything we did, we've either written, produced, or played on.
Or played on.
For other people, and now we're actually standing in front going, who's not there?
You're the guys in front.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works out.
Russ and I are still in the back. As it should blanket that way.
And we're gonna stay
All
there.
right. So you know what? That's the perfect segue, because I want to roll the videotape back a little bit and talk about kind of where you guys came from and the scene that you guys grew up in. And Lee, you and Russ met, if I'm not mistaken, in 1968. Am I fairly accurate?
Sounds right.
Yeah, actually, you
Lee remembers.
were in a band called Things to Come.
Right.
And I was in a band called Wolfgang. It was either Wolfgang or Little John Farm, I remember, but we were actually on a same bill.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing Russ, I think you were wearing Speedos. maybe my mind is going on. No, but we kind of go back, but actually it was with James Taylor that was really the catalyst for all of us to come together.
Yeah, I mean, but before we get to James, Danny, there was the City. Tell us about the City and who was in that band.
Well, the City was Lou Adler's idea. He wanted Carol King to make an album. Carol was too bashful and shy and too insecure at that point as a performer to be the one. So she wanted it to be in a band situation. And so it was Charlie Larkin on bass, myself, and Carol. Carol wrote all the tunes with various people, including Jerry Goffin and Tony Stern. And the drummer was Jim Gordon, fantastic Jim Gordon. And my memory of it was, this is the first album I played on all the way through, the first full album that I'd ever done. I could not believe I was in the studio with Lou, one of the great producers ever.
Yes.
And with Jim on drums, it was heaven. And I'll never forget it. And I learned a tremendous amount just from.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about Lou Adler, because we've done a bunch of things with Lou here. We did Monterey Pop 50th Anniversary exhibit. The Cheech and Chong exhibit we have upstairs is very much, he's very much involved in that. I think he does not get the credit he deserves for the career that
You're
he's
right,
had.
yeah.
So tell me what did you learn from working with him?
Well, how to roll a really good joint was really
It's legal now, it's legal.
He would come around and he'd say like 2 or 3 things to each of us. He was very laconic, very laid back, great presence, very much in control. He was the coolest cat I'd ever seen in my life. And just the way he dressed and the way he looked, and it's just his presentation, his demeanor. What a cool cat, and he still is, as everyone knows.
Yeah. And there's a connection again with James Taylor, but through Bugs Pemberton,
Right.
and if I'm not mistaken, John Fishbach.
Right. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
When I was in this group Wolfgang at the end of the 60s, our drummer was Bugs Pemberton, who was actually, he had come from London. He was in Jackie Lomax and the Undertakers, who were kind of rivals to the Beatles at that time in London. And he had a very close friend named John Fishbach, who owned Crystal Recording Studios in town, and he did all of the early Stevie Wonder records. And John Fishbach would come to our rehearsals. We were up in Sunland, we had a house up there, and we'd hang out, and one day he brought one of his friends with him, and it turned out to be James Taylor, who was hanging out at our rehearsals. And this was, James had just gotten back from London at this point, and this was just before he broke here. And that was kind of through the back door how I ended up with James, was through Fishbach, through Bugs. So it gets very convoluted at times.
Well, it just shows that so much of the music community, particularly coming out of the late '60s into the '70s, were so, it was a very small community.
Yeah.
It was a very small community of people. But you did not, speaking about your history in particular, you did not necessarily start out as a bass player. Am I right about
Well, I started as a pianist.
Yeah.
As a classical pianist. And when I was 12 years old, I went into junior high school thinking I was going to be the piano player. And that was at Birmingham out in the valley. And go Braves, except that now it's Patriots because it's got to be politically correct. But we won't get into that or I'll be thrown off Facebook again. But it's one of those things. I went in junior high school and I said, I'm here, your pianist is here. And Ted Lynn said, we got 50 kids that play piano, we need a string bass player. And he pulled this old blonde K upright out of the back room and set it up against me, and I plucked one note and felt that vibration and said, sold. Done. Never looked back, I just fell in love with bass at that point.
Fantastic. Waddy, you moved to Los Angeles also in 1968. But before, I have to ask you about this. You grew up with a guy whose name was Leslie Weinstein, now known as Leslie West. Leslie West, the great guitarist and songwriter from the band.
He lived in the same building that my brother and my father and I lived in, and I heard some not great guitar playing one day when I was doing what I normally do, which was being truant from school, and I kind of went up through all the floors in this building till I came upon the right apartment, and I banged on the door, and this guy opens the door, and I went, "Are you playing guitar in here?" He goes, "Yeah." Leslie's got that voice. Yeah. I said, "Well, my name's Bobby Wachtel, and I can help you. You need help." And I've been playing since I was 9.
This is at what age? This is
about 17, maybe.
Yeah.
I would say 17. And I said, I've been playing since I was 9. You need help, I can help you. So we spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
Had a great good time.
and this is a little sidebar to the discussion, but I have to ask you about this. If I understand correctly, you guys saw the Beatles at the Paramount Theater. Am I right about that?
That's very true, yeah. Leslie and I.
What's the memory of that? Do you have a memory of that show?
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember we stood there on the left loge, which is the lower balcony, hanging right over the stage, looking at them and wishing you could hear them because there was so much screaming. You could barely hear anything, but every once in a while you'd hear a little burst of music, and it was incredible.
Yeah,
It was incredible.
amazing. Somehow, the cow sills figure in to your getting out here.
They do indeed, yeah.
Explain.
Well, I took the band that I had, and we went up to Newport, Rhode Island, which is where they hail from, and someone said, "Have you heard the cow sills?" And at that point, I just said, "What is a cow sill?" I never heard a word like that, much less there was a name. I went, "What kind of name is that?" And it was, at that point, it was just the four boys, Billy, Barry, John, and Bobby, and they were remarkable. They were standing at this little, it was a bar in this hotel, and they would play there every night, and they did Beatles, that's all they did, and they sounded exactly like the Beatles. It was phenomenal. And literally, John and Barry were like 10 and 11 years old, and they were fantastic.
Yeah.
And their alcoholic father was someone I kept having thrown out of the club I worked in, because I didn't know who he was, I didn't care who he was, he was just an obnoxious guy. And all of a sudden someone said, "Well, that's the Cowsill's father." I went, "You gotta be kidding me." And I went, "No." And he wanted to manage me, and I'm going, "Man, don't even talk to me. Stay away from me. I've thrown you out of this club like 10 times right now." And he says, "Well, our kids are gonna make it." I said, "Yeah, well, when you get $1 million together, bud, come talk to me." And then about 8 months, 9 months go by, and I am now with my band up in Vermont, which is getting towards the end of the world. There's no much further north you can go. And it's the dead of winter, and I got a call from the club owner who used to help me throw Bud out of the club. And he said, "Hey, Waddy," he got that New England accent.
Yeah.
"Hey, Waddy, it's Dave." I went, "What are you doing, man?" He goes, "I'm working for Bud now." I went, "What?" And he goes, "Oh man, I'm telling you, man, he's got a lot of money now, and he still wants to sign you." And Bud got on the phone. He goes, "We're coming up to see you." "You're coming up here?" "Yeah, we're driving up tomorrow." And it was a total blizzard, and they made a 6-hour drive and came up. And they heard the band, and I sat down with Bud, and he goes, "Band sounds good, man. Band sounds good. I got the $1 million now. You want to come with me?" I went, "Yep, let's go."
Wherever it is, we're going.
It's 50 below up here, man.
That's
Let's
right.
go.
We're getting out of the snow.
And then shortly after that, he said, "I'm moving my operation to Los Angeles. Do you want to go?" I said, "Yep." There I said, "Let's go."
Done.
Yeah. So
Done.
That's when we came out.
Well, and I want to come back because I know there's Nick Vinay is involved in your career, but Steve, how did you meet these guys? When did that happen?
Let's see, who did I meet first? I guess I met Leland first.
Use the mic.
Oh, yeah, microphone. Thank you, Lee. Let's see, I got to LA about 10 years ago and got signed to a label called Emergent Records, which was 5.1 Records before that, as an artist. And they had the idea of, because I also played sessions for so many years and knew so many people, having it sort of, rather than have one band, have all these different guests in different rhythm sections. And we had a lot of people on it. Robin Ford and Eric Johnson and David Crosby and so on and so forth. I was at NAMM show and I saw him, and he's a big star at NAMM. People will not leave him, they follow him around like a Pied Piper. And I just went up to him and I said, "You're going to play on my record." He went, "Okay."
You were an
So
agreeable
what I
guy.
do.
Yeah, that's what you do.
And so I met Lee first, and then a fellow that I grew up with, named Dan Nash, knew Waddy, connected us. I got Waddy played on that record. And then it turns out that Russ's son mixed the record. And so Russ's son invited me to the Troubadour to see the reunion show, and introduced me to Danny. And it just, and then I guess then I knew everybody.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, you're part of the family. Lee, when you were kind of coming into the community, it was around the time that the Wrecking Crew was breaking up.
Well, they never really broke up. It's just their
Fading.
time was
Fading.
waning.
And I'm wondering, you know, is it your sense that you know, kind of a baton was being passed? Did you feel that way?
Not at the time, but in retrospect, it felt a little like that. I was in a band in 1967 called Group Therapy.
How much do I love that?
And Mike Post was our producer, and at the time he was the musical director on the Andy Williams show. So we went into United Studio A to do our record with him, but we weren't allowed to play on it. The Wrecking Crew played on it, and that was the first time I'd ever really been in the studio. And I'm sitting in there looking through the window at Hal Blaine and Carol Kay and Mike Dacey and Mike Rubini and Mike Melvoin. And Jim Gordon was the percussionist, the new young kid in town. And I thought, I'll never be part of this. This is an amazing thing. And 3 years later, I was working with these guys every day. And there was a change that was happening in LA at that point with singer-songwriters. When James hit, it dramatically changed the music scene. And those guys were on some of those records, but for the most part, I mean, when you listen to some of Bread records and stuff, some of those guys are on those records. But certainly towards the end of the 60s, with all the groups, Mamas and Papas, the Association, all those groups, was those guys. And I look at all them as my mentors. I don't know how much time we have. I have a great Tedesco story. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard of Tommy Tedesco.
Please tell it. Please tell it.
Tommy
we
Tedesco.
had his son here with the Wrecking Crew
Damon?
movie. With the Wrecking Crew movie.
Yeah, which is, if you've never seen the Wrecking Crew movie, see it. It is absolutely a remarkable piece of history. But I was doing a session, Universal Studios used to have a studio on the lot, and we did all the Universal shows there. And we had baffles that were about this high, so we all looked kind of like Kilroy sitting there. You can see about this much of us. And I'm sitting next to Tedesco, and the conductor's across the room. It's a pretty good-sized orchestra. And he goes, Tommy, I'd really like to hear like maybe mandolin on this one. So Tommy goes, okay. Reaches down, picks up his mandolin, starts playing. He goes, no, that's not it. He goes through about a half a dozen instruments trying to figure out what he wants to hear. And Tommy just keeps bending down and picking up something, another instrument. And I'm sitting here just crapping my pants, dying, because Tommy only had his acoustic guitar and he just kept bending over and sitting back up. But he was so gifted he could play in all these positions and it sounded different. And so they finally settled on what they wanted to hear. And I looked at him, I said, I just learned more in 5 minutes how this business works than I did all my years of schooling. And so immediately after that, I went home and took my bass and I drilled a hole in it and stuck a switch in the hole that I call my producer switch, so that when I'm working with a producer who says, I want to hear something a little more shimmery, I have no idea what that means, but if he sees me flip a switch, then make sure they see you flip the switch. And then you just change your hand position a little bit, but there were no wires or anything on the switch, it was just a placebo. That's my wrecking crew.
Never doubt the quality of Grammy Museum programs. So Russ and Danny and Lee, very much associated with James Taylor and singer-songwriter or whatever. And Waddy, as you're kind of coming along here, you're seeing these guys' names, particularly Danny's name, on albums and liner notes or whatever. And what are you thinking at this time about
Well,
him?
I'm thinking, who is this guy, Cooch? And how come he's getting all this work, and why can't I get going in this business? And then I wound up on a session for Bobby Womack with Leland. This is probably 1970, I would guess. And so we finally met, and we dug each other enough to talk to each other anyway. And shortly after that,
That's enough.
there was one of them, and then I was pulling into Studio Instrument Rentals one day in my '57 Chevy, And out of the driveway comes Russ Kunkel in his '57 Chevy. And we looked at each other and he goes, "You're Waddy, right?" I went, "Yeah, are you Russ?" He goes, "Yeah, we'll be seeing a lot of each other." And he drove off, I went in, and then a few days later, thanks to Nick Benet, you said about
Yeah,
Nick,
yeah.
I played for, he invited David Foster down to a session. I was doing a lot of sessions for Nick. A lot of folk records and a lot of acoustic stuff. And Nick Benet said to me, "It's time." He called me into his office, and I went, "What's the matter?" He goes, "It's time for you to move on, man." And I thought he meant I was being fired. I went, "What did I do? What's wrong?" He goes, No. You're better than what we're doing here. It's time you moved on to better stuff." So I've invited this new piano player named David Foster. He's coming down tonight to play with us, and I'm specifically brought him down because I want him to hear you play. So bring your electric rig tonight and play. I want you to play slide and play electric guitar. I want him to hear you. And so I met Dave, and we played a bunch of songs on this record. And about 2 days later, I got the call to come from Lou Adler's office, and it was a Tim Curry record.
Tim Curry.
A record for Tim Curry, and that's where Danny. And so it was Russell and Leland, and there was Cooch finally. So the two of us met, and as all the animosity I had for who is this guy Cooch? Why is he playing all these records? We loved each other the second we met.
Yeah.
You know, reggae. All we could talk about was the reggae tunes we were in love with, and we've been just going at it since then. Really, that's how it started.
We talked about Lou Adler. There's another producer guy who was kind of, you know, also central to a number of you, Peter Asher. Tell me about the connection with Peter Asher and working with him.
Who are you talking
Dan.
Dean?
Yeah.
Well, Peter Asher is heavily responsible majorly responsible for all of our successes. And one of the main reasons was that he put our names on the albums. Now, unfortunately for the Wrecking Crew, who were all brilliant, as Leland was pointing out, they were never credited on their records. We were. Peter had our names right on there. So this new singer-songwriter sound, which of course, that was an expression made up, that term was made up by critics. None of us ever used that term. But it turns out that became a style, and we were identified, the three of us were identified with that style because Peter had was great enough to put our names on the record. Also, Peter's a brilliant producer. He put us all together, great producer, and still a wonderful friend to all of us.
and a great guy. We've had him here, but you know, that was an amazing time in music here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
You know, whether it was, you know, James Taylor, Jackson Brown, Carole King, Linda Ronstadt. I mean, it goes on. Is there a way for you guys to describe what a typical day in those days was like for you?
Well, I think it was a little different for all of us, but Lee, why don't you tell them what the day is like? You might not want to hear this, but
No, I mean, it was a remarkable, kind of like a golden age for this. I remember, the one thing I was kind of anal about is I've saved all my date books. And when I look back in that period, it's just black with stuff. I mean, we were doing 4 dates a day, sometimes 5 dates a day. And you could work 6 days a week and just take a day off. It's hard on your family and everybody, right? But it was really an aggressive time, and everybody was being signed. So there was lots of work, where now it's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
But we would be doing sessions, and you'd finish a session and walk out into the hallway, and somebody'd be across the hall starting, and they go, "What are you doing now?" We say, "Oh, we just finished." They go, "Come on," you'd roll your gear across the hall to the other room, and you'd be doing something. I mean, I met so many people, worked with guys like Herbie Hancock, just because of finding them in a hallway and saying, you know, "You want to come play on our session?" And it was a really aggressive time musically, and it was more work than you could literally handle.
But there was a community sense.
Oh, absolutely.
It was not competitive necessarily.
There was a lot of hang.
It was totally amazingly open. It was, you know, I had just gotten here and I walked in. It was on the equal to like Liverpool for the Beatles. At that time, there was this explosion of all these artists, and they all knew each other, and they all wrote songs for each other, and anything. Everyone was helping each other do stuff, and that's how it was when I walked into this scene. It was amazing. You mentioned Linda, Jackson, James was going, Warren and I came up together through the Everly Brothers. Little Feat was going. It was like, and the Birds were killing. I met David Crosby, and A couple days after I met him, he called me and said, "Let me ask you something. What would you think if I was to put a band together with Stephen Stills and Graham Nash?" And I'm like, "Come on, what do I think? I don't have to think about it. It'll be amazing. It'll be the best band ever." And that's how it was. And you'd be on a session, like Lee just said, and you'd walk out into the hall and someone would say, "Oh, you're here, come on in here and play." You know, when I was working with Warren, we'd have Don Henley and Glenn Frey would stop by for a drink and be hanging out. You know, "Oh, you need a vocal on this? You need some harmony on that? Anything." And that's how it was. And you'd call Linda, say, "Listen, I need a background part. I'll be down in 10 minutes." You know, it was amazing. Jennifer Warnes and Linda and I sang the backgrounds on Excitable Boy. Because I sat there, I said, "I need a Beach Boy harmony part on this." "Linda, what are you doing?" "Nothing. What's up?" "I need a part." She goes, "Call Jennifer, we'll be right down." It was amazing, and that's how it was. It was completely...
I want to come back to Warren and Excitable Boy in a minute, but I want to talk about a little bit about being session musicians and what the qualities you have to have, because it's, if you don't know how to get along with people, if you're not a good collaborator, I don't think anybody's going to call you back. So talk a little bit about, because God knows there were plenty of challenging people around, at that time. What from your perspective, what makes a good collaborator? What makes a good studio musician?
Well, you have to remember that at that period of time, the artists that we had the opportunity to work with were James Taylor, Carole King, Jackson Brown. Just those three names, the incredible body of work that those people wrote during that period of time, and Joni Mitchell, and we kind of serendipitously were there to play on those songs. And you can't compare that to just any songwriter or any session. I mean, we were incredibly fortunate to be there at that point in time. And the first time we heard "You've Got a Friend," I mean, that's a pretty amazing song.
Yeah.
So I think, I know certainly what I thought was, well, you better play something fucking good on that.
But here's what I found amazing in reading a little bit about each of you guys. Russ, I understand that before you played a note for Carole King, you asked her for a copy of the lyrics.
I don't know if it was before I played a note, but I remember asking for them because I just wanted to see, I wanted to look at them as I was playing the song down to kind of get a feeling for, because sometimes when you're playing music, you're not listening to the lyrics. You're kind of thinking about where you're playing, and you're making sure, for a drummer, you're making sure that you're not in front or behind anybody.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just have an idea of what the songs were about.
Yeah.
And that stuck with her. She mentioned that somewhere along the way.
I mean, she's referred to you as the greatest singer-songwriter's drummer.
Yeah, that's very kind of her.
Yeah. Lee, in looking into a little bit about your work, one of the things, look, there are lots of people who have chops, and lots of people who have technical skill, amazing technical skill. But you've talked about simplicity and kind of serving the song.
Well, I think collectively, we're all of the same mind. It's all about the song. It's not showing, you're not there to impose yourself on the song and show off your chops and what you got. I mean, when I worked with Billy Cobham, I had to have those kind of chops for fusion. But when we would work with artists like James or Jackson, if it's a whole note, you play the best whole note that can be played at that point. It's not suddenly, this is demeaning because I'm not doing enough. And I think all of us really serve the song, and that's really the primary importance of all this. Now, when Russ mentioned You've Got a Friend, I think the first time we ever performed that was when we were out as a trio with James. And he came out on stage and he announced to the audience that this is a new song Carole King wrote, and we're going to perform it now for the first time. And it was at King's College or something back. And he said, if you hear any mistakes, it's Lee. And So we played the song, and every bass note was wrong. And I would be damned if I was going to take a bullet for him under this. So I looked at him afterwards. I said, "What song did we do before this?" And